Okay, we're here for the fourth part of our four-part series on rabbinic assessments of Herzl's role in Jewish history. I want to acknowledge again that this series generally was sponsored by Drs. Saul and Rena Langerman in honor of Rena's parents, with the tefillah that Misha Ana, L'chanane Mishol v'Azariah b'soch kif shanaish hu ya'anenu. Shkosh Baruch Hu should give them continued long life and strength. Tonight's lecture is specifically sponsored by Gil and Molly Horowitz in honor of Dr. Hal and Jody Crane, Molly's parents, and we acknowledge as well the participation of the Frankel family in enabling the recording of these lectures. So tonight we're talking about our last installment, and in a certain sense, perhaps the most complex, is the story that is referred to as Hamisped B'Yerushalayim, the eulogy given in Yerushalayim, which is about a eulogy that wasn't given in Yerushalayim. It's a paraphrase of a verse, which was the title verse of this hesped, of this eulogy, Bayom Hahu Hidal Hamisped B'Yerushalayim, which is the assessment / eulogy / relationship of Rav Kook to Theodor Herzl. Just to begin, as we have at some times, with a little bit of an anecdote that perhaps underscores a little bit of the ambiguity and sometimes the choice in telling the story, in telling the history of what happened, of the ambiguity of this relationship. In 1903, Theodor Herzl visited in Vilna. And everyone knows that Vilna was known as the Yerushalayim of Lithuania. Vilna was a city of Seifrim Usforim, the city of the Goyen of Vilna. Of course, in 1903, it was 100 years after the Goyen of Vilna. However, it was still and always, the last great leader of, across Lithuanian Jewry was Rav Chaim Ozer Grudensky. And where did he live? He lived in Vilna. Vilna was the place where all the yeshivas came and congregated. There was that window in that time of the Holocaust from where the Mir Yeshiva departed to Shanghai, and from where, again, Rav Chaim Ozer was seated and helping to lead many things. But Vilna was a complicated city, like all Jewish cities in Eastern Europe during that period, where, in fact, there were many, many, many people who had turned away from tradition. We discussed once one aspect of Vilna, if I remember correctly, at the time, in the days of Rav Chaim Ozer, when there was an election for the chief rabbinate of Vilna. I think 6 out of 25 members of the voting council were explicitly religious Jews. There was a lot of complexity in Jewish life in Vilna, like there was anywhere else. In 1903, Herzl visited Vilna, and at that visit, he encountered, this is not disputed, there's no question, he was greeted by the Cheshek Shlomo. The Cheshek Shlomo was Rav Shlomo HaKohen, the Dayan of Vilna, a great sage, elderly sage of Vilna, who came and greeted Herzl. He greeted Herzl according to virtually every account. He was a Kohen, and he gave Herzl Birchas Kohanim, Yevarecha Hashem Yishmerecha, and he presented Herzl with a small Sefer Torah in a case, which was presented to him by the city of Vilna. We have a picture of the case of the Sefer Torah, that nobody knows where it actually is, but this is a picture of it. And interestingly, fascinatingly, is that everybody knows what was Herzl's name. Theodor Herzl, what was his Hebrew name? Everybody knows it as Binyamin Zev. Well, that was sort of like a discovered name or a rediscovered name. At a certain point, he was known as Matisyahu ben Yaakov, Dr. Herzl. Matisyahu in his lifetime. It's engraved on this ark that was given to Matisyahu from the community of Vilna. Even when he, the account we have later of after his life of a Kilmalei Rachmim, which was made for him, or a eulogy which was made for him, it was referred to as Matisyahu Herzl. So someone can do a study on the true Hebrew name of Herzl. We're not going to do that. But he was presented with this Sefer Torah. There are a number of different accounts of the story, including one which is included by Rabbi Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg, who we discussed last time when he spoke about Herzl, the man of faith, Herzl Ish Hadas, and he tells the story about that moving account and what an impact it had on Herzl to meet to come to the community of Vilna, which was still a city that was very, very steeped in tradition, and to meet Rav Shlomo HaKohen. But the versions range from that there was a reception for Herzl in one of the buildings, the communal buildings in Vilna, and people came, including Rav Shlomo HaKohen of Vilna, who came and greeted him there, and there was a presentation of a Sefer Torah. To a different account, which is that all of the rabbis and sages, including Rav Shlomo HaKohen of Vilna, came out to greet Herzl, all holding all the Sifrei Torah of the city, and came out to greet him in a huge parade. And that second account is that they came to greet him as Melech Yisrael, as the King of the Jews. Herzl was given that title informally many times in many things because of what he was doing, because he had gathered together a Congress of the Jewish people, and almost like a parliament. It wasn't, of course, a parliament of the Jewish people. It was a Congress to discuss a specific subject, and because of Herzl's very striking regal bearing, that majestic beard, and in general he was a very regal, handsome man. So some people refer to him as the King of the Jews. And whether the rabbis of Vilna would offer him the kind of greeting that was coming to a king of the Jews, some would say, yes, that's how they took him in. And others would see it differently. And the way they would see it is, again, there are different accounts of the story. But yes, it is true that a king of the Jews is supposed to have a small Sefer Torah that they carry with them wherever they go. But imagine yourself as a rabbi in Eastern Europe, and there's a huge movement which is happening of Jews wanting to go to Eretz Yisrael. It was a movement which actually, many Jews in Lithuania, Russia, were involved in before Herzl was involved in it, in the form of the Chibas Tzion, the Chovei Tzion movement. And the movement had been taken over largely by sources that were not particularly religious. And Herzl himself was someone whose background was not particularly religious. What would you want to do when you encounter this person? Okay, so again, in some versions of history, you would want to ignore him, you'd want to run away from him. Clearly, that wasn't the path of these people. And that's, in a great sense, of course, one of the thrusts of what we've been trying to show in this lecture series, is that many of Gedolei Rabbani Yisrael, who wouldn't have been called necessarily, in the typical sense of the Zionist camp, still recognized the significance of his role, of his leadership, of what he was doing. But what they would certainly want to do, it would seem, would be to influence him positively and about Torah and involvement in Torah. And what we saw and demonstrated in past lessons was that Herzl was very open, very, very open to that kind of influence. He may not have been ready to declare his forthcoming Jewish state to be a halachic state. He definitely did not want that. He firmly wanted a separation of church and state. But his own connection to Yadus, especially as he had become so exposed. So many of the people involved in the Zionist movement came from Russia, from more traditional communities, and he tapped in for the first time in his life to how what he was talking about matched with a dream of 2,000 years, yes, which was a religious dream and a religious aspiration. Herzl himself was becoming more and more faithful. We mentioned a couple of times how Herzl didn't give his son a bris when he was born, but he did give his son a bris before his bar mitzvah. It was traumatic for the son. It was traumatic for the son. The son later, again, gave up the Jewish faith. Ultimately, Rachmana litzlan took his own life. But and one of the things which he described as being difficult for him, besides, of course, living in his father's shadow, was that experience. And the idea was that Herzl was becoming more and more identified with the Jewish people and with the Jewish dreams. And as he said at the first Zionist Congress, that Zionism is a return to Judaism before it's a return to the Jewish state, they wanted to tap into that. They wanted to strengthen that. If it was me, today, in hindsight, I don't know, what do you think I would do? What would you do? Would you be ready to declare him the King of the Jews? I wouldn't be ready to declare him the King of the Jews. Would I want to give him a gift of Jewish tradition? I mean, we do that all the time. Whenever we're involved with a broader Jewish community, Jews who are less connected to their faith, but we're working together on a project and we have an opportunity to present them something, we don't get them, the Rand McAnally Atlas. We get them a sefer, we get them a mezuzah. We want to bring faith to life and to bring a sefer Torah. Yes, and maybe that Sefer Torah, as was reported that Reb Shlomo of Vilna said, the Sefer Torah should lead us, should go with us to Eretz Yisrael, that certainly represented a hope. But in everybody's version of history, they draw it in their own way, because of the great ambiguity of the story of this parsha. And it leads us to this discussion today specifically of Rav Kook and his connection to Herzl, or his relationship to the idea of Herzl, to the personality of Herzl, to what Herzl represented. Now, Rav Kook was very quickly thrust into this situation in a very significant public way. And that was that Rav Kook became the chief rabbi of Eretz Yisrael. Let's take that back. Rav Kook became the rabbi of Yafo and the new settlements of Eretz Yisrael, of Yafo, Tel Aviv, Yafo. There was not in 1904. He arrived in Eretz Yisrael in May of 1904. Herzl passed away in July of 1904. So very shortly after Rav Kook arrived in Eretz Yisrael, Herzl died. He was a prominent personality in the new settlements, in the new part of Eretz Yisrael, not in Yerushalayim, not in the Yishuv HaYashan, but specifically in new Eretz Yisrael, which was not dominated by religious personalities. And Herzl had died, the leader of the secular Zionist movement. And understandably, of course, all of Eretz Yisrael was shaken up, all the way to Yerushalayim. They were all shaken up, but there was going to be a gathering, an assembly, which was being made there in Yafo, in the bank, in the English Palestine, the English Bank of Palestine, and Herzl, Rav Kook, was approached by leaders of the community and asked if he would join and would share words, would speak at the eulogy, at this event, this commemorative event for Herzl. And Rav Kook accepted, and he did speak at that event. And the speech which he gave at that event is published. It's published in many places, including in Ma'amorei Harei, a beautiful collection of various essays of Rav Kook, a very readable collection. Some of Rav Kook's writings are much more poetic and difficult. These are very, very readable essays, much more readable essays. And it's referred to, its title is HaMispeid B'Yerushalayim, the eulogy in Yerushalayim, even though, of course, it did not take place in Yerushalayim. But it is called that after the opening phrase of the Hesped, of the eulogy, which quotes a verse, which says, Bayom Ahu, Yigdal HaMispeid B'Yerushalayim K'Mispod Hadar Derimon B'Bikas Megidon. On that day, it's from the Navi Zechariah, the Mispeh, the eulogy, will be great in Yerushalayim, and it refers to a vague reference which there's a struggle to understand exactly what it means. And Rav Kook gives this magnificent essay, in fact, this magnificent speech, and in the speech, he never once mentions the name of Herzl. It was a gathering in the name of Herzl. I don't know. It wasn't like it was tape recorded and transcribed exactly. In the write-up of it, it is not. His name is not mentioned in any of the comments, and it's a dramatic and very, very significant essay. And as we will see, his participation in this aroused all kinds of significant difficulties. Let's draw a little bit more context here to what's going on. Rav Kook was not the first member of his family to come to Eretz Yisrael. He was not the first member of his family to come to Eretz Yisrael and to assume a significant rabbinic position. Rav Kook's father-in-law was known as the Aderes, which stands for Rabbi Eliyahu David Rabinovitz Teumim. The Aderes was a Rav in Europe and was invited to Yerushalayim to come and be the successor, the assistant rabbi, the heir apparent, to be the Rav of Yerushalayim. He was to succeed Rav Shmuel Salant, who was very, 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 very old, and was still there in Yerushalayim and functioning as the Rav of Yerushalayim. Tragically, the Aderes passed away before Rav Shmuel Salant. He never took his place. It's a beautiful and very, very sad story. that the Aderes, they made an apartment for him in the old city of Yerushalayim. Maybe you've heard this story. They made an apartment for him in the old city of Yerushalayim. They gave him an apartment in the old city of Yerushalayim. That was, of course, the natural place for it to be. And they cut a wall. They cut a hole in the wall for a window that would see out onto the Rabbis. And he said it would kill him. And he was, I think he died after 6 months living there, and just to see out onto the Churban. There were other difficulties, other tsaros, but that's one of the stories that is told in Yerushalayim.
He only had 6 months?
I think he only lived 6, maybe longer. I think in that house he only lived 6 months or something like that. But it was a very, very short amount of time. And again, Rav Shmuel Salant was very old. He was expected to succeed him. He never succeeded him. Now, the Aderes was there in Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim was the old Yishuv, was a very conservative community, very, very conservative community. And in that community, Herzl certainly wouldn't win any popularity contests. And the Aderes had to worry. He was coming, joining a community, coming in, and needed acceptance. Now, was he just there, self-conscious, a rabbi in the first 6 months of his position, worrying about pleasing everybody? It's complicated to win over, especially an outsider coming into such a community with whatever sense of strength that you would imagine would be possessed of such a community. It was also complex because he had this son-in-law who was going out there. Now, Rav Kook was trusted. One of the reasons why they put him out there was because the developing business of Eretz Yisrael was agriculture. They didn't have computer chips yet. So it was the agriculture which was developing, and agriculture in Eretz Yisrael is very complicated. And it wasn't necessarily like they were dominating the European markets with their bell peppers. They were, sustaining there within Eretz Yisrael. And the Jews of Eretz Yisrael were worried about eating the produce of Eretz Yisrael. Would it be taken care of properly? Would it be tithed properly? One of the big jobs of Rav Kook was to travel amongst the settlements and to make sure that all the halachos, mitzvahs, hatluyas ba'aretz, the agricultural laws of Eretz Yisrael were being observed. And the people of Yerushalayim completely relied on him. Right, that was the last time the people of Yerushalayim relied on the Rabbanut. Right, so they, the people of Yerushalayim completely relied on him to take care of this hashgacha for their produce.
And it wasn't really a tradition. I mean,
he had
it was all new because
it's all new. It all had to be rediscovered. Again, work had been done from the time of the Gaon of Vilna, but there's no question. There's so many steps of rediscovery when it comes to the mitzvahs hatluyas ba'aretz. That was very, very significant. Look, the Chazon Ish, when he was coming to Eretz Yisrael, he wrote shilas. He wrote some shilas to Rav Kook. People debate what he accepted, what he didn't accept, but he was on the ground, very, very, very serious authority in these matters. That was again a significant part of his job description. But with the delicacy of somebody out there dancing the dance in the new yishuv, and his father-in-law is the rabbi trying to gain the confidence in the old yishuv, it's a complicated situation. There are all kinds of disputes about what happened when, for example, when Herzl visited Yerushalayim in 1898, did he visit Rav Shmuel Salant or didn't he visit Rav Shmuel Salant? Some say he did visit Rav Shmuel Salant. Some say he didn't visit Rav Shmuel Salant. It's clear that if he visited Rav Shmuel Salant, he visited him quietly. And what seems to emerge from many of the accounts was that Herzl wanted to make rabbinic visits, and Rav Shmuel Salant said, I'd be happy to meet him, but I want him to come. I don't want a big public meeting. So the question is whether Herzl ended up coming or passing by, or whether he said, "Look, I don't want to make him uncomfortable, so I'll just skip it." And when Rav Shmuel Salant avoided him, it's not a question that Rav Shmuel Salant wasn't a major secular Zionist or a big fan of secular Zionism. That's not really a debatable point. But what is also clear on the other extreme is that a lot of what Rav Shmuel Salant was worried about was, as I think we've mentioned in the past, that Herzl was very frontal about what he wanted in Eretz Yisrael. He wanted an independent Jewish state, and there was another strategy, which was the strategy of the Chovevei Tzion, which in many ways included the old Yishuv of Yerushalayim, who most of them were fans of the agricultural settlement, and that was not to go and try to take over the country, but to be able to develop Jewish outposts and places for Jews to live. What they called, I think what Herzl called derisively, a strategy of infiltration, rather than a broader tactic to take over the state. And they consistent with the non-Zionist ideology, did not want to be frontal and were worried about being overly aggressive and wanted to just, be comfortable, settled. I've told many of you the story many a time of how Rav Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, on the Shabbos morning after the 1929 riots, insisted on walking through the Shuk, through Shar Shechem to go do a bris, while his family members were petrified. But he said, if the Arabs can't scare us off of one street of Eretz Yisrael, if they scare us off of one street, we'll never be able to stay here. Strident, strong, yes, they wanted to stay there. He just didn't want to be the prime minister. He just wanted to be able to be there. They wanted Jews to be able to be there, to develop there, to flourish. And when it came to this, these were all matters of negotiation with the Sultan, of the Ottoman Empire in Constantinople, and so on and so forth. So they were worried about getting on his wrong side. He was the king of the place. They didn't want to ask him for the country. They wanted to get along. So they didn't want to be publicly associated with Herzl. But was he completely dismissive? It is established fact that Rav Shmuel Salant sent a telegram of Nichum Avelim when Herzl passed away. He had a telegram sent to the family of Herzl, to the grieving family of Herzl in Vienna. It is established, I don't think really contested, that Rav Shmuel Salant wanted that there should be, or agreed that there should be, you can decide whether he wanted or whether he agreed, that there should be a memorial gathering for Herzl held in the Churva synagogue in Yerushalayim. It didn't end up happening. There were zealots, kanoim, who disrupted it, but in a different shul, in the Beis Yaakov shul in Yerushalayim, by Bifkudas, Rav Shmuel Salant, Kel Malei Rachmim was said for Herzl on the Shabbos after he passed away. Rav Shmuel Salant was strong, was confident, wasn't afraid per se himself of the kanoim. The same could not be said for the Aderes. The Aderes did not sign on. Rav Kook's father-in-law did not sign on to that Tanchumim, that condolence telegram that was sent to the family. He was much more worried about the zealots of Yerushalayim. And so, what his son-in-law chose to do, which was to choose to participate in that event, memorializing Herzl, was something which would bring him great concern. And it was a concern which he would address to Rav Kook. And part of the intrigue of the story is going to see how that plays itself out. So Rav Kook attends this gathering. He attends this gathering. And I want to share with you what Rav Kook said. It's a masterful piece. It's a majestic piece. It's a piece which, in a great sense, expresses in a strong way what Rav Kook's vision was of the relationship between secular Zionism and Yahadus was. It certainly is his first foray in Eretz Yisrael doing it. It's a first expression, in a certain sense, of the bringing together of the two. He spoke perhaps differently and even more strongly in Europe, but there are many elements here which remain dominant throughout the writings, throughout the life of Rav Kook. So what does he speak about? This essay calls upon the Gemara's drasha, the Gemara who speaks about how Yonasan ben Uziel said that when he translated this Eretz Yisrael, Eretz Yisrael was gripped by a tremor in explaining this. And he says, I did this, Shalai Tarba Machlokes Be Yisrael, I didn't do this for my honor. Yonasan ben Uziel, when he said, I didn't translate for my honor, I translated it so that there wouldn't be a lot of argument in the Jewish people. So what's going on here? What is this? Chazal explained that it was like the eulogy of Achav and the eulogy of Yoshiyahu, the two of them together. And what is this? So Rav Kook explains, again in light of the Gemara that identifies it with the death of Mashiach ben Yosef. And he gives a broad view of what happens in Malchus Yisrael and the kings and the kingdoms of the Jewish people. We know that the Jewish people were led in their infancy, in our infancy, by two kings, by two regal personalities. There was Yosef HaTzadik, who was the king of the Jewish people by being the king of Mitzrayim, or the viceroy of Mitzrayim. And there was Yehuda, who, Yehuda Tayoducha Checha, Yehuda was going to be always the traditional source of kingdom in the Jewish people. Vayigash Elav Yehuda, the Medrash says, Yehuda's encounter with Yosef and Mitzrayim, the negotiations with Yosef, were the two kings of the Jewish people who were meeting each other. And it's there at the beginning, it's there in the middle, when we have the kingdom of the Jewish people split in the days of Rechavam, the son of Shlomo, and there's a breakaway kingdom which is initiated by Yeravam ben Nevat, who is from Yosef. And it's there in the end, when we have a tradition of two Mashiachim, two different messiahs, Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David. What is the role of these two? What is the relationship of these two? And Rav Kook, to simplify the matter, to oversimplify the matter, says that the Jewish people, as a nation, have a need for physical success. They have to flourish as a nation. They have to be a body politic. They have to be successful materially. They have to create a kingdom like other nations have a kingdom, K'chol hagoyim, like all the other nations. And then the Jewish people have an absolutely distinctive element, and that is the Jewish people who function as the light of the world, as the light of the nations. The Jewish people in their connection to Torah, their relationship to Hashem Yisbarach, which, with regarding this, Hashem Bodod Yanchenu, right? There, the Jewish people are utterly unique. They're utterly unique. But these are the two parts of the Jewish people, two parts of life, body and soul. The physical well-being of the Jewish people, the spiritual development of the Jewish people. And the role, if we look back in the beginning, we could say, okay, so Yosef went, and what was his position? His position was actually to get much more material than everybody else, to provide the sustenance, to be involved in agriculture, to provide bread for the Jewish people. Yehuda, when Yaakov sent him, what did he send him for? To establish the Beis HaTalmud. Remember, he went early to Mitzrayim to establish the houses of learning. Yehuda has the name of Hashem in his name, just with a dalid. Add the dalid. Yosef HaTzadik represents the material building, Yehuda represents the spiritual building. And in the greatest sense, Rav Kook says, the real challenge of Jewish life has been to not have those two at war with each other. The division which existed between Rachel's children and Leah's children, between the Malchus of Yosef and Malchus of Yehuda, is because there is a chronic inclination of people to think that the material and the spiritual are at war. That the material has to somehow put the spiritual to the side, or that the spiritual has to put the material to the side. And the real strength of the Jewish people will only come when there's a recognition of the synergy, of the need for both of them to be there together and to function together. When you'd have both of them as one, and as Rav Kook said, and as written in many Sforim, that preceded, is that was really the vision of David HaMelech. David HaMelech was, as the verse describes, when Shmuel HaNavi originally identified him, he was Admoni im Yefei Einayim. Admoni is a term which is used to describe whom before him? Esav HaRasha. Esav HaRasha is described by Vayetze HaRishon, Admoni, and David HaMelech is described as Admoni, because David HaMelech had these properties, these abilities within the physical, the material world. Imifei Einayim, with beautiful eyes. The beautiful eyes, Chazal say, is representative of the Sanhedrin, of the eyes of Torah, of the eyes of the vision of truth, and that guidance to bring to the Jewish people. He was to be a blend between the two of them. That would be the ultimate synergy, where both of them come together, where body and soul are governed by the Jewish people. But all too often, what happened and happens is that there is a rift, a break between the two of them. And the one that builds the body rejects the soul, and the one that builds the soul rejects the body. And Rav Kook brings as an illustration of this a classic and desperately tragic Agoda in Maseches Brachos. It's a famous story which is told in the Gemara in Brachos, that when Yeravam ben Nevat, who was again that breakaway king from a descendant of Yosef, who split the kingdom of David HaMelech from his grandson, from Rechavam and Shlomo, when David HaMelech when Yeravam ben Nevat did this, so he was approached. And they said to Yeravam ben Nevat, Chazar bach, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to Yeravam ben Nevat, Hashem said to Yeravam ben Nevat, Chazar bach, do tshuva. Because you're only Yeravam ben Nevat, it wasn't just that he split the Jewish kingdom. He then put up roadblocks, stopping Jews from going to the Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. He established temples with golden calves in them so that the Jewish people wouldn't find their way back to Yerushalayim in order to solidify the break. Otherwise, he thought the Jewish people they'd go to Yerushalayim for Yom Tov, and then he'd be sunk. They'd be back in David HaMelech's family's territory. So what did Hashem say to him? He said, Chazar bach du tshuva, vani va'ata uben Yishai, you, me, and Ben Yishai and David HaMelech will stroll in Gan Eden together. Just do tshuva. And the three of us, buddies, will go walking in Gan Eden. And Yeravam ben Nevat said, okay, but one question, mi barash, who will walk in front? And HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Ben Yishai will walk barash. He said, if that's the case, I'm not interested. And he backed off. And the way Rav Kook understood it was that was this tension. Right? Ben Nevat, Chazar bach, he was representing the physical of the Jewish people, and his refusal to defer, to recognize that the body of the Jewish people is for the sake of what the Jewish people offer uniquely, which is the soul that the Jewish people have for themselves and offer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's world, to everybody who occupies HaKadosh Baruch Hu's world. The inability to defer to that was what spelled the demise and the division of the Jewish people. The unhealable rift. The unhealable rift which we hope would be healed again. And Rav Kook in this talk moves forward to contemporary times and to the way he saw that this was exactly what was being played out again. That there was a secular movement which was focused on developing the body, rebuilding the body of the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael, sovereignty, a place which would be free of anti-Semitism, economic development, all the dreams, all the elements which they hoped for there in Eretz Yisrael, the body, and then there were the people who were worried about Klal Yisrael's connection to Torah, which was a big worry. Not only was it a big job, but it was a huge worry. The secularization of the Jewish people was dramatic and developing significantly. And there was such a distrust between the two sides that one rejected the other entirely. The secular said in their rebuilding of the body, they were rejected. They wanted to give no place to the spiritual within the building of the Jewish people. Hatzionut, Zionism, has no connection to Das, to faith. That's a statement which Rav Kook repeated over and over again as an accepted plank of the Zionist Congress. Whether it was in fact the case or not is a question. It's not really found in those deliberations. There certainly were many in the Zionist community who felt that way, and Theodor Herzl himself, in his vision of the Jewish state, famously describes a separation of church and state, but not really a banishment of religion. So maybe completely accurate, not completely accurate, but there was certainly tremendous hostility in many quarters. Undebatable, many hostility in many quarters. Herzl was one of the more sympathetic of the secular Zionists to religion. Many of his contemporaries were people who were Shanu Pirish, who had been connected to Yiddishkeit and rejected it. Herzl wasn't in that category at all. And as a result, there was this, again, he saw what was happening generally as a tremendous tension, that the religious community saw these people as just concerned with trying to be like a nation like all other nations, just building up the physicality of the Jewish people, not giving them credit for the significance of that enterprise. And on the reverse side, the secular community not wanting to give pride of place, significant respect, place at all, in many cases, to the religious as being the raison d'etre of the Jewish people. And he said it is this division that led to the demise, again, without mentioning by name, the Tsar, the Agmas Nefesh. It's hard to know exactly what he means. Is he speaking mystically? Or is he speaking because it is a fact that, Herzl proposed in those, that year before he died, the Uganda program. And that was something which many people in the religious community saw that as a complete break and separation from it. And he did die of a broken heart. And many times when that happens, it's not just physical ailment, but he was having a hard time. It wasn't a dreamy thing. So I don't know what Rav Kook's theory is, metaphysical or mystical, or an actual physical description of what's happening there and changing there. But one way or the other, he diagnoses this as the real problem, as the real division which is happening with the Jewish people, and says things will not be restored until those who are worrying for the material of the Jewish people will be willing to bring Yadus back in. And it's very clear in his thing that it's not like he says, okay, everyone's to blame. Yes, historically he speaks about the difficulty that there was a mutual distrust. But he said they are chasing out the religious, and so the religious won't be able to accept it. It seems quite clear that he puts the onus in that direction. But one way or the other, the vision of the recognition that there can be people contributing to the physical, people contributing to the spiritual, and working together and respecting the role of each other, it's a message which was relevant then. Of course, it's a message which as well remains relevant until this day. This was Rav Kook's hesped. This was what Rav Kook described. And, okay, let's go to CNN's take on this. Let's go to the soundbite on the 11 o'clock news. And what is it? Theodor Herzl was Mashiach ben Yosef. Mashiach ben Yosef's job is to reconstruct the Jewish people physically. That was what Rav Kook articulated. Mashiach ben David is to bring the spiritual element. So who just died? He's saying a hesped at a memorial gathering for Theodor Herzl. And the verse which he quotes is a verse which Chazal describe as taking place in the context of a hesped over Moshe ben Yosef shenerag, about Mashiach ben Yosef who was killed. And this is in the context of Herzl. And he speaks about Mashiach ben Yosef there to build up the physical body of the Jewish people. So the soundbite that makes its way back to the zealots of Yerushalayim is that Rav Avram Yitzchak HaKohen Kook, the son-in-law of the Aderes, just eulogized Herzl as Mashiach ben Yosef. You can't win, You can't win. We actually have a letter that Rav Kook wrote. It's not published in the regular letters of Rav Kook. We have a letter which Rav Kook wrote on the 29th of Tammuz to his father-in-law, explaining to him what happened and what didn't happen. And he writes, in a certain sense, upset about how, things which he said and what he did are taken out of context. First of all, of course, they were just upset that he participated. People were just upset that he participated. And then this, the ability to report this is something more. And Rav Kook explains what would be his shita in life. And he says that he's here in these moshavot. He has success in being able to inspire people, in being able to introduce them to Torah. He tells a story about a visit which he made to Rehovot. And in that visit that he made to Rehovot, immediately following it, I was told that for next week, people stopped shaving. He said, and I never spoke to them about shaving with a razor. I never spoke to them about it. I spoke to them about Torah, and then they were inspired a little bit, and they wanted to change, and they wanted to do things differently. All I need to do is to take the person who they admire so much, who's done good things. He didn't function according to my spirit or according to yours. His vision wasn't my vision and it wasn't yours. But he did for the Jewish people, and for these people, he was the hero, he was the trailblazer. All I need to do is say, I'm not showing up, and I lose any opportunity to be able to have an influence on them ever. And my goal here is in the pathways of Shalom. I'm firm. I have what I believe in. but in the pathways of Shalom to find those common areas that I would be able to show respect, and that would be able to therefore gain for me the credibility that they would hear me, and they would be able to respect and hear the words of Torah as well at the same time. And Rav Kook writes with some degree of, first of all, he writes, of course, in his romantic vision, that citing the Zohar, and it's something which he cited elsewhere, cites in the end of the Misped B'Yerushalayim, that the Zohar HaKadosh says that the Geula will only come when a person has and demonstrates the capacity to turn the Ra L'Tov, to turn the bad into good. And he says, so I'm not going to engage with it. I'm just going to reject it. I'm going to build as if it doesn't exist. I have to try to turn things around. And he says as well again, he says, if I would have, he says as follows, how can I just cast away souls of the holy people in the Holy Land, that we're relying on them for the settlement that they're doing in our land? I'll do something such that any guidance that I give in the future will be absolutely ineffective, because guidance is dependent on the yachas, on the connection of love between the guide and those who he's trying to guide. If they feel like the person doesn't care for them, it'll never happen. He says, and what's the idea? Why shouldn't I have done it? What would be the only reason for me not to show up? So that I would be respected by people who don't understand me, who don't understand what my motivations are. So I should be clear of any doubts in their eyes. I should compromise on that which is my principal goal. He said, no way, I'm not doing it. People who know me should judge me favorably, should be dan l'kaf, should understand what my intentions are, and shouldn't throw me out because of this. I'm not going to compromise my whole role here because of what the Kanoim are going to say, because of what the Zealots will say. That's what Rav Kook says, that's what he maintains, and parenthetically, at the end he says, I want you to know, I didn't say anything about Herzl, positively about Herzl himself. I said nothing about Herzl himself, and again, maybe he edited the transcript afterwards, but again, the transcript that we have, Herzl's name is not mentioned. He says, I didn't say anything about Herzl himself, I just said that an intention like this, to enhance the situation of the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael, it is worthy, if we were worthy of it, whether from the side of the tshuva to Hashem, to the fulfillment of the Torah and the honor of the Torah, and the haskama, the agreement that everything should be founded on the koach HaTorah, and tshuva from sinas chinam, and the seeking of peace with a whole heart, like we're obligated, it could all go and be brought together to do it. In other words, what he's doing could be co-opted and could be made to produce something that was very, very positive. I wasn't singing the praises of him as an individual, so even to that extent, please don't beat up on me anymore. So this is Rav Kook. It's not the whole Rav Kook. This is what Rav Kook said, which was recorded, which you have to be careful about, which again created all of these problems, political problems around him, around his father-in-law, misinterpretation. But what he describes, again, is a fundamental basic message of Rav Kook. But to understand the ambiguity of this, I want to share with you a couple of additional pieces. And they're important pieces to get a fuller picture. Rav Kook, in the year 1903, towards the end of the year, gets a postcard. He gets a postcard from family members, and he says, and he writes back a response. This is letter Yudalid from Tov Reish Samach Gimel, Erev Slichos. Of Tavrei Samach Gimel, and he is writing to them, and he says, I was hoping that one of the guests would come to us for Yom Tov, for the last days, for Chol HaMoed, especially Shmuel. shechoshashni, that I worry, biyoschem asukim yachad b'tzionus, with your involvement together in Zionism, taisu mashiach b'lo zimna, you're going to bring Mashiach not in its time. Okay, so he's speaking skeptically. Rav Kook published very famous pieces in Hapelis, which was not a Zionist newspaper at all. He published, some very, very serious bikoris about the secular Zionist movement. And here, listen to what he writes. Very, very sharp. You're involved in Zionism, you're going to bring Mashiach before its time. And he says, my sharpness here is directed at you because when you sent me a Rosh Hashanah card, a Rosh Hashanah card to Rabbi Eliyahu Rivlin, you sent a Rosh Hashanah card that had pictured on the postcard Dr. Hay and Dr. Nun. Who's Dr. Hay? Is Dr. Herzl. And Dr. Nun is Dr. Nordau, Max Nordau, a very significant religious Zionist who partnered with Herzl ultimately in the Zionist Congress. V'zeh ha'achrein, and this last one, hu to'avas nafshi, is the revulsion of my soul, v'nefesh kol mi sheyesh bo zik yahadus, and the soul of anyone who has any connection to Yahadus, to Judaism. It's not worthy to take pride and to be blessed with the image of that wicked person. Now he's referring to Dr. H and Dr. Nun. Dr. Nun was more troubling because he was a person who was a Shanu Pirish. He was raised religious, he rejected it, and many of his early writings especially were very, very with a poison pen towards Yadus and to faith. Herzl again was much more innocent in terms of these things. He was not. He did not have that kind of edge. But Rav Kook is writing very, very, very sharply, very guardedly about this, and negatively. So you would understand, and this is a private family correspondence. This is not to please anybody. This is not to try to make anything, any politics. Extremely, extremely sharp. Extremely sharp. Rav Kook, in his writings, more publicly, when he wrote to Mizrahi, again, we don't have time. We don't have time to discuss this here at length. But I'll just read to you like just one sample of his writings. Rav Kook, who is considered to be the rabbinic patron of Mizrahi, he was not technically within, and was a very, very strong battler on the conscience of Mizrahi, that they needed to be more aggressive, that they were too passive, a religious force sitting at the table of a secular Zionism that did not, that had this statement that they had no connection with Das, with faith, and that there should be a religious Zionist group that just joins with them and accepts this and doesn't advocate more forcefully for the place of Yadus, was a source of great upset to Rav Kook, and there are many, many letters about it that he writes. The particular letter which I'm going to read to you is letter number 571, which is from 1913, the summer of 1913, which is written to the Mizrahi Council for the Zionist Congress, and he writes as follows. Ha'uma bichlala, the nation as a whole, im kol godla v'chasna haruchni, with all of its greatness and spiritual strength, with the gaon nishmasa, with the power of its spirit, cannot, under any circumstance, narrow itself to the small circle of the dream of Dr. Herzl. With all of its beauty and all of its strength, relatively, but it can't. The Zionism, the practical, the theoretical, the political, the diplomatic, with all of its branches together, as they've gone from potential to actuality to this day, has many things that are great and significant, that we are called from the depths of our Jewish being to support them with all of our strength, physical and spiritual. But all of this together only comprises the Zionist body. We are called upon to inject it with the soul. And this is the way he writes. And this is the way he felt about the narrowness of it. Yes, Rav Kook at later times, we have written his acceptance to participate in later years in memorials for Herzl. He was, for a world outside, to whom Herzl was the be-all and end-all, was the ultimate hero, he wasn't going to not participate. He wasn't going to disrespect because that person did something. He had galvanized forces that were doing things that Rav Kook wanted to befriend and to influence. But at the same time, to see this person as somehow an answer to the Jewish situation, he was a piece. He was providing something, but it was not something that Rav Kook was at all comfortable to reconcile with, to do it. You see it in the unease. Again, not just driven by the politics of his father-in-law, but an internal unease, and one that could be seen in a shocking story, which is recorded in a diary of a man named Asher Ehrlich, came from the second Aliyah, who was there present in a shul in Rehovot. In a shul in Rehovot, when it was in the year in Tammuz, the 20th of Tammuz, the Shabbos before the 20th of Tammuz of 1905. So it was approaching the first Yortzeit of Theodor Herzl. And Rav Kook would spend Shabbos sometime in Rehovot in the summertime. He would spend Shabbos there in the community. He would come there, as the writes in the diarist, to eat grapes. Okay, it's a nice way of saying what he went for, right? He came there to eat grapes. And he says, B'Shabbos, on Shabbos, all of the people from the settlement of Rehovot came to the shul of the settlement, and the guest rabbi sat on his place on the Mizrach, on the front wall. And the Chazan went up to daven and was carrying on in the davening, and everything was going fine until, unexpectedly, a great tumult broke out. When the Chazan was asked by the community to say a Kel Molei Rachmim for Herzl on Shabbos, not on Friday night, but on Shabbos. On Shabbos, people did Haskaras Neshamos. It's a minhag Ashkenaz generally to say Haskaras Neshamos on Shabbos morning. We don't do it. We say people do it by Shabbos Mincha, but they said at Shabbos morning. At the time, we say Avarachamim and all those things. V'nei komim komo harav. Rav Kook got up and he said, "You don't say a Kel Molei Rachmim for a Zionist leader." With all of his greatness and all that he added, he wasn't interested in Minhagei Yisrael and the customs of the Jewish people. It's not his tune. Don't play it for him. So Rav Kook protested it. This caused an uproar amongst the young people of the community. 3 of them went up onto the bima, protested loudly against Rav Kook. The greatest of them, Ehrlich, approached the Duchan, banged 3 times on the table, and he said a Kel Molei Rachmim for Herzl over the objections of Rav Kook. The community was divided. When the Rav saw that what he had tried to do was not accepted, he chose to be quiet and just, that's it. He let it alone. In the evening, after Shabbos, he invited people to come over to his house, and there, in a calmer environment, he explained to them what his thinking was, where he came from, and what he was doing. That's quite a thing. He didn't want to say a Kel Molei Rachmim because in Kol Gadluso lo hikpid biyoser al minhagei Yisrael. So I mentioned briefly at the outset, maybe before we started or at the beginning, that perhaps this is one of the most complex of them all. Rav Kook acted in different ways, spoke in different ways. He was fighting a battle for the soul of the Jewish people to be present in the rebuilding of Eretz Yisrael. And in a certain sense, if you think about it, when the secular builder of the area comes and says, let's have a memorial service in a bank, I'm going to come as a rabbi. I'm going to bring the Sefer Torah into the secular context. But when we're in the shul, And as a shul, we can't be people who are being mevater on the primacy of Yiddishkeit. We can't put up as our Sefer Torah something which was not promoting the Sefer Torah. He fought the battle in a certain sense to exclude the reverence from the shul and to bring the shul into the bank, into the secular world. It's contradictory and it's consistent. To Mizrahi, he yelled and screamed, "Why are you satisfying yourself with that narrow vision, that little circle that he's built for us? That's not what the Jewish people are about." And on the other hand, the people who were going and building that circle and building the body of the Jewish people, he said, "Okay, let me bring to you what it's about. I'm determined to bring to you what it's about." He didn't want for a second that Jewish people should compromise and become reconciled with a non-spiritual view, a non-spiritually defined mission of Klal Yisrael built around Torah and the development of Torah. But he was keenly aware of the many who had no piece of Torah in their thing, in their vision, and was deeply committed to trying to be a shliach, the shliach, to bring that soul back into life of the Jewish people. This is in a sense, so complex, but a picture of what it is. Ultimately, I think the picture that emerges from all of these is that as we understand where we are, where we've been and where we continue to be, the rebuilding of the body of the Jewish people, together with the rebuilding of the soul, remains an ongoing task that requires some sense of cooperation, respect, but absolute determination to not settle for anything less than that the soul should be primary, even as the body is very much needed. We should be Zeicha Be'ezus Hashem to see the union of body and soul with the coming of Mashiach ben David. B'yamei Rabbi Amen.